right, folks. You can still hear me, Martha?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. All right, folks, so we'll get started then. I am Dr. Kevin Cranmer, for those who haven't met me before or who aren't in my practice. I'm the founder of Oculiance, and this is our first refraction webinar, which is refraction training for technicians. So let's get into it. I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. All right, here we go. So refraction training for technicians. This is going to be approximately an hour long. We'll have plenty of time for questions. It's a big subject. We're going to go through all of refraction for a basic for sort of a normal patient. This is not a training session on advanced techniques in refraction or refracting low vision patients, or it's the basic algorithm for refraction so that technicians who in the day-to-day practice will feel confident in an algorithm you can go through and get a good refraction on a patient and with very accurate results. So welcome. This has been sponsored by Oculiance, which is a community project of Southeast Connecticut Eye Care, where we're trying to bring together the professionals in the eye care community, right now mostly in Connecticut and Rhode Island, but hopefully expanding outward after that. And we're trying to share resources and provide training and some of the just making it easier for everyone to practice. I'll go into that a little bit more. Our target audience right now is obviously ophthalmic and optometric technicians, and also lay staff of the office. Anyone who wants to learn how to refract or become familiar with refraction, this is something that's absolutely core to what we do. It's probably the most important skill that a technician can have in terms of improving office efficiency, and contributing to patient care. So thank you, Oculiance.com. That's providing the platform for signing up for this. Oculiance is meant to be a community of eye care professionals that is connected online. We want to provide forums for people to communicate and share ideas, ask questions of others. We have some classified advertising on there that helps support the site, and that allows us to provide a low-cost way to recruit staff, to recruit physicians, maybe residents out of training. People who are in the industry and who are looking for new positions can get on there. There's also a way to sell used equipment, because right now to sell used equipment, you have to go through a distributor normally, which is very expensive. And this is a way to connect directly to colleagues and to be able to buy and sell equipment. And also services and consulting. We're hoping to get more professionals on there, such as accountants and distributors of ophthalmic equipment, servicers, for instance, maintenance of lasers, and some ways to find the services that your practices need. We also have a good task manager on there. We have video eye charts. If you want to save thousands of dollars on a video eye chart, then Oculiance is free to use. The video eye charts are high quality charts that you can use for just the cost of the equipment of setting up a computer screen. And there's lots of other stuff on there. We hope you'll check it out. Membership is absolutely free. So the question becomes, why learn to refract? In many practices, all the doctors know how to refract, obviously. I mean, if you're an ophthalmologist or optometrist, you're very good at refracting. But it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to refract a patient and measure what the optics are in their eye. And it really takes about as much time as the actual exam does. So if you're a technician and you can learn to refract a patient and accurately measure the optics in their eyes, so the physician can give them a prescription for glasses they can rely on, then you're doing a great service to the patient and the practice. You decrease wait times. The practice can see more patients. You're really allowing the doctor to focus on the key parts of the exam and to be able to um, sort of do the things that doctors do best. The physicians can refract patients too, but anything you can do to take work off the shoulders of the physician is really going to help that professional to be able to see more patients, and also to focus on the things that are probably most important in what they do. Um, so one of the really, or probably the most important thing in learning to refract is learning just the basic optics of the eye. This is obviously a simplified diagram of the eye, but these are the four real optical components of the eye. One of the ones that we all forget about, but that is actually the most important, is the tear film. That thin layer of tears that coats the surface of the cornea is where about 2/3 of the focusing power of the eye is. So when light comes in and hits the tear film, then the light will change direction. Sort of like if you put a stick into a swimming pool, the stick looks bent, and the reason for that is because of refraction of the light, because the light bends when it hits a medium of a higher optical index. So when the tear film's not good, then the optics won't be good. So which is why we spend so much time on dry eye in our practices. But the tear film really does make a difference, and people with poor tear film will experience variable vision and blurred vision and glare and things like that. Um, Underneath the tear film, and the thing that gives the tear film its form, is the cornea. And the cornea ideally is round in all directions, sort of like a soccer ball or a basketball. Um, but sometimes when the cornea is not well formed and it's steeper in one direction than another, more like an American football, then the optics are not going to be good for that eye, and you'll have what's called astigmatism. But the cornea actually doesn't do most of the bending of light. The cornea provides the structure for the tear film and provides sort of the basis for the shape of the tear film. But the cornea is not doing most of the refracting of light. It's really just providing that structure. Behind the cornea, you have the anterior chamber and then the iris, which don't have a huge impact on the optics. The iris to some extent, but mostly it's the lens behind it, and the lens does about 1/3 of the focusing power of the eye. So light coming in the eye gets about 2/3 focused by the cornea, converged by the cornea and the tear film, and then the lens does the other 1/3. Behind the lens, inside the eye and wallpapering the inside of the eyeball, is the retina. And the retina is a very thin, about 0.5 millimeter thick layer of nerves that provides the sensing power of the eye. And so when the light is focused on the retina, and most particularly the macula and the fovea, which are the central parts of the retina, then the retina will sense that image just like a CCD in a camera, or the film in an old style camera, and it will sense the light and make the image or sort of gather the data for the image and send it back through the optic nerve to the brain. And the brain obviously is what puts it all together. So for normal optics, the light comes in. This is light that's parallel rays. Imagine that light coming from a distant star. The light rays are parallel. They come in and hit the tear film. They get bent about 2/3 of the way through the tear film, and then another 1/3 of the way through the lens. And ideally, they focus to a point on the retina so that that star that you're looking at looks like a point of light. And then the retina senses the light and sends the signal to the brain. And when we do refraction, all we're doing is we're moving that focal point in the eye. So if the focal point is not on the retina where it should be, then we can use lenses in front of the eye, either as a contact lens or glasses or the lenses in the phoropter, and we can move that focal point forward in the eye, backwards in the eye. We can collapse astigmatism, and we can bring that that light into a focused point where it should be. The amount of optical power we need to use in our phoropter or glasses is measured during refractometry, which is a word that's not used very much, but refractometry is basically what we're doing today, the fancy word for it. And that is basically measuring the optical correction for the eye to bring light to a focus point. So important to know about in the eye is this thing called accommodation, which is basically a way for the eye to increase its optical power. So whereas before in the normal eye, if you look, the lens is that blue thing that's behind the cornea. You can see here when we accommodate, then we're voluntarily increasing the power of the eye, the focusing power. And the lens goes from that skinny blue thing to the green thing that's on the drawing. The ciliary muscle relaxes or squeezes and relaxes the lens so that the lens becomes fatter, and it also moves forward in the eye, and that increases the optical power and it moves the focal point forward. And the reason that we have this is so that we can look at near targets. So this accommodation decreases with age, but in a young person, you can move the focal point forward in the eye. And this makes the eye not like a fixed focus camera, but more like a variable focus camera. And so it's going to be important in refractometry when we check patients for glasses that we relax accommodation and that we find the resting focal point of the eye. But for young people, it's more difficult to refract them because it's easy for them to fool you because the optics can be variable. So here are these are the principal refractive eye diseases, and there are 4 of them. And I say eye diseases because many of us tend to think, or at least insurance companies tend to think of myopia or hyperopia, astigmatism as routine diagnoses. I think of them as just eye diseases. You know, even though it's possible to correct them, these are. I mean, you imagine back before glasses or contact lenses, that if you were severely myopic, then you were basically blind, functionally blind, except for seeing things up close. That was a disabling disease. And so we take it for granted, but all these things we do with refraction and glasses, um, they're sort of miraculous. I mean, we can refocus the light in the eyes and take people from seeing poorly to make them see well. The 4 main diseases are myopia, hyperopia or farsightedness. Myopia is nearsightedness. Astigmatism, which literally means not point-like. If something is stigmatic, it means that it focuses to a point. Astigmatic means it does not focus to a point. And the last one is presbyopia, which is just that loss of accommodative ability as time goes on and you get older. So let's take a look at these individually. Myopia is the most common one. And this is nearsightedness. The focal point in the eye is in front of the retina. And so the eye is effectively too long, or you can think of it as the focusing power of the eye is too great. So when light comes in the eye from a distant target, it focuses in front of the retina. And this is a little exaggerated unless someone's really severely nearsighted. The actual focal point will only be sometimes a fraction of a millimeter in front of the retina where it should be. It's actually for every millimeter in front of anterior to the retina or towards the cornea, it's about 3 diopters of myopia. So a fairly small amount. But with this, patients are able to see it near. And the reason for that is because when light comes in from a near target, the light is actually diverging. It's not, the light rays are not parallel. The light rays are radiating outward from that near target. And so that moves the focal point back in the eye, which is why myopes can see up close without glasses, but not at distance. The next eye disease is hyperopia, and that is farsightedness. And in hyperopia, the focal point is behind the retina. That means that the patient would be blurry, except young patients can overcome this. So if you're 17 years old and you can accommodate 5 diopters, then you can move that focal point forward voluntarily. And so hyperopes are the ones who may have seen well all their lives until they start to hit their late 30s, 40s, early 50s, and all of a sudden they can't overcome it anymore because they can't accommodate. The lens in their eyes becomes stiff, has become somewhat sclerotic, and they unfortunately lose that ability to accommodate, and they can't move the focal point forward. So you'll hear often where people didn't wear glasses before and now they need them. First, they'll need them for near. Later on, they'll need them for distance too. In young people, this is more difficult for the refractionist because these patients are used to accommodating and used to moving that focal point forward. So it's difficult to get them to relax their accommodation and to get the true resting focal point for their eyes. And we'll see that in the future. Next is astigmatism, a common eye disease, and astigmatism again means not point-like. So if you imagine the cornea as being more curved in one direction than another, the light that doesn't really come to a focus anywhere, the light will be converged by the eye because of its natural converging power, but it won't. The light will come only to sometime to a line or to sort of a smeared image. Where the light converges in the eye is called the circle of least confusion. And that's initially what we're going to be trying to find with refraction when we do our spherical refraction at the beginning of refracting a patient. We're going to move the sphere or the focus point, the circle of least confusion, forward and backwards in the eye and try to get it right on the retina and get as good as possible before we start collapsing the astigmatism. All right, lastly, there's presbyopia. This is a disease of age. It is inevitable for everyone. No matter who you are, you're going to become presbyopic unless you're blind or some weird thing. And it's basically the lens inside your eye gets stiff, and so you can't move that focal point anymore. You lose your ability to accommodate. Hyperopes become blurred early at near. And even emmetropes, or people with perfect natural optics, will have difficulty with seeing near targets. Myopes may not experience this so much because myopes can take off their glasses and even without accommodation see near targets. But when they're wearing their glasses and the glasses focus them at distance, if they don't have a bifocal ad or progressive lens, then they're going to have trouble seeing up close and they'll have to take their glasses off. If they're wearing contact lenses and the contact lenses are not multifocal or bifocal, or if they don't have monovision or something special, if their contacts focus them at distance, then they're going to have trouble seeing stuff up close, and they'll need reading glasses when they're wearing their contacts. So basically, lenses that we use, whether they're contact lenses or glasses, they move the focal point in the eye. And when you refract, it's super important to think of where you're putting that focus point, because if you think about what you're doing with the lenses and putting them in front of the patient with the phoropter, then if you think about where that focal point's going, it'll all make sense. If you just go through the algorithm and you uh, are not thinking about where the focal point is, then you're sort of you won't really be able to understand what you're doing, and it makes it much more difficult to refract. It won't make sense to you. So think about where the focal point is, and I'm going to come back to this in the future when we start thinking about the mechanics of refraction. And we're going to make sure that we understand exactly what we're doing with that focal point. All right, so the power of lenses are measured in diopters. And it's diopter is a little bit confusing. The actual definition is a reciprocal meter. So that means if you think about it mathematically, it's for those who remember any of their algebra, it would be 1 divided by the number of meters to the target. So a 1 diopter lens will focus starlight, or a distant image, an image coming from a distant source, at 1 meter. And you can actually try this in the clinic. If you take a flashlight and you shine it through a +1 lens, it will, as long as the flashlight is far enough away, that lens will focus the light at 1 meter. That's about 3 feet and 3 inches from you. If you have a +2 diopter lens, it will focus the light coming from a distant source at 0.5 meter. And a +3 diopter lens will obviously focus light at about 1/3 of a meter, and a +4 at 1/4 of a meter, and so on. So you can see that the higher the power of the lens, the closer the focal point, and the more converging power that lens has. So there are different lens types, and I encourage you to go in the drawers in your exam rooms and look at the lenses that are in there, because you can actually play around with them and you can see what these lenses do. The first type of lens that we'll talk about is the converging lens, or plus lens, and it's called a plus lens just by convention. Um, the lenses that are plus lenses are always lettered in either black or green. You don't see green too much, but mostly black. And they'll say on the lens like a plus and then a number, +1 or +1.5, +3.75 or something like that. And on the phoropter, they're also black. And they're used to correct hyperopia, and also to help with presbyopia, because they converge the light in the eye. The next type of lens is a diverging lens, and that's called a minus lens. By convention, they're shown in red on the phoropter and on loose lenses, and they are used to correct myopia because they diverge the light. And remember that the light coming in the eye is already converging. The eye itself has about 60 diopters of converging power. It has to take those light rays and focus them down from being parallel to being focused less than an inch from the tear film. So the eye has about 60 diopters of converging power. So if someone's myopic and the focal point is in front of the retina, then the minus lenses will they won't actually diverge the light, but they'll make it converge less, and that will move the focal point backwards in the eye towards the retina, and that's why they're used to correct myopia. Remember, people with myopia have the focus of light inside the eyeball, forward of the retina towards the cornea. And so you want to move that focal point backwards to the retina and use a diverging lens for that. And the diverging lenses are, they're also in diopters. And you can think of, if you have a +1 lens that would focus starlight or distant light 1 meter away, then a minus lens would reverse that. So if you put the lenses together, then it will take that converging light and it will diverge it so that it's again parallel. Uh, the last lens we're going to talk about is a cylindrical lens, and this gets a little bit more complicated. But these lenses are literally of a type that's cut from a cylinder. If you can imagine like a glass rod, if you sort of cut it in half through the long axis, then you kind of look at the front surface of that, and you see that there is a curved front surface that will focus light down. But it only does that in one direction because the lens is flat in the other direction. So light actually, with a cylindrical lens, will focus to a line. At some point in that light path, if you're looking at light from a distant source, then it's going to focus it down to a line. And where that line is measured again in diopters. So a cylindrical lens will focus the light down to a line, like a +1 cylindrical lens will focus that light to a line at 1 meter. Now, if you're outside that focus, then things start to get complicated. And there's a light path or a light, you can't really call it a cone, but it's called a conoid. And you can look online sometime. There's the conoid of Sturm is the actual shape of this light path. It's not that important that you know what that looks like for most of the light path, but it does at some point, or at some plane, I should say, come it becomes focused to a circle, and that is the circle of least confusion, and that is what we're looking for someone with astigmatism. That's basically the best you can get with just focusing light with a spherical lens in someone with astigmatism. So then once we have that, then we'll try to refine the astigmatism, collapse it so that the light comes to a point. But more on that later. One thing to note with a cylindrical lens is it has a direction. So with a spherical lens, you can kind of rotate that lens around, and in any direction you rotate it, it's going to have the same power. So when the lens is in front of the patient, it has the same power, and it um, it doesn't matter which way it's rotated. But with a cylindrical lens, it really does matter. And so that's why when we correct astigmatism, we have to write not only the power of the cylindrical lens, but we also need to write down what the axis was, what direction it was pointing. One thing with cylindrical lenses that's important to know is they also have some spherical power, and it's 1/2 of their cylindrical power. So if you correct someone's eye with the phoropter and you add +2 cylindrical power, then you've effectively also added +1 of spherical power. And that's why when we're refracting, then if you add cylindrical power, you're going to have to take away some spherical power to maintain that circle of least confusion, which will eventually become the focal point. You're going to have to move that back to the retina where it should be. Okay, so unfortunately, there are two types of cylindrical lenses. They come in plus cylinder and minus cylinder, and you should know both. So that adds to the confusion with refracting. It doesn't matter too much which one you're using. There are some advantages to using one versus the other, and you can convert the numbers you get when you're refracting from one to the other. There's some basic math you can do to convert back and forth. Um, Optometry offices tend to use minus cylinder lenses, and there's good reasons for that. The biggest one being that it's much easier to prescribe contact lenses, which are issued and manufactured to specifications in minus cylinder. So when you refract a patient, you don't have to convert to a different system if you're going to prescribe them with contact lenses. In ophthalmology offices, because of the sort of shape of the eye and the when you look at topography, it's easy to find the sort of steeper part of the cornea, and that corresponds with the direction of the plus cylinder correction. So ophthalmology offices tend to use plus cylinder. And it makes it confusing. It would be nice if we all use the same thing, but there are probably good reasons for using different ones. But it makes it a little bit confusing when you're learning um, to correct astigmatism, what you do in the mechanics of your refraction. But we'll go over that some when we get into that. Um, so the the principle is the same. Basically, a minus cylinder lens is more of a diverging lens in the axis that you're pointing at, and a plus cylinder lens is more of a converging lens. But we'll get into that as we get into the actual mechanics again. So let's go over the anatomy. We've done the anatomy of the eye. Let's do the anatomy of the phoropter. It's also called the refractor. The refractor is a more generic name that's not used very much. Phoropter comes from a brand name. You can look on Wikipedia and see the whole history of the name phoropter. Uh, if you spell phoropter with an O, I think it's the brand name and the trademarked brand name. I think it's owned by Reichert now. But with an E at the end, I think that is that's the generic name, and most people call it a phoropter. Basically, when you're going to set up the room, that's setting up the room is critical. When you're actually doing the refraction, it's important that you position the patient well. When the patient, you're going to waste a lot of time if the patient can't actually see the exam chart, or it's difficult to see, or the lens in front of them is fogged up. So make sure that you pay attention in the beginning to just setting up the room. That is definitely part of the refraction. You can make sure they're sitting up in the exam chair. They shouldn't be slumped backwards. They shouldn't be, um, um, not looking through the oculars in the phoropter. They shouldn't be uncomfortable. Bring the chair up so they can see the chart, even without the phoropter in front of them. When you set up the phoropter, you want to open both oculars. I'll show you how to do that in a second here. You want to visualize their pupils. You should be able to see their pupils through the oculars, and the oculars are sort of the part that the patient looks through. Close the ocular over the left eye. You want to set the level. Make sure the convergence levers are set to distance. And you also want to set the interpupillary distance. If you know it, you can put it in. There's a scale on the phoropter, but for the most part, you're just going to move the oculars inward or outward so that the patient can see well through both. And then also you're going to put in the starting refraction. There's no reason to start from scratch. In almost all cases, you'll have a starting refraction either from an autorefractor or from measurement of their current glasses on a lens meter, or just from knowing their previous refraction from their exam last year. You can look in the exam notes and you can put in their previous refraction. So here's a picture of the top of the phoropter. This is a Topcon VT10, but pretty much all the phoropters these days look basically identical. At the top, there's the attachment to the arm that connects the phoropter to the stand. You can see that vertical silver thing that's just to the right of the Topcon label. And there's a little knob that attaches that. That's a rod that comes out the top. It may or may not be present on the phoropter you're using. It's called Prince's rule. It's used to check near vision, and it should be in the vertical position when you're doing your refraction. I think I may be getting a question here, so I'm just going to switch over and see if we've got Any questions here? Does anyone have any questions so far? I'm just seeing good morning. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, great. I'm going to switch back to our presentation. Okay, great. So there are two knobs that you see also. Not sure if you can see my pointer here, but there are two knobs on the left side of our picture. The top one is when you rotate that knob, you will level the phoropter. The phoropter will tilt back and forth because again, you're measuring the astigmatism and it has a direction. It matters that the phoropter is level. There's a small bubble level on the right side of our picture here, and you can rotate that knob so that the bubble in the center, or so the bubble becomes centered below that white dot. The knob on the left side of your picture that's on the lower part is used to change the interpupillary distance. So you're going to want to rotate that back and forth and make sure that the oculars are in front of the patient's pupils. You see that there are two silver levers going further down. Those set the convergence for the phoropter. So it's possible to use this to refract patients for near vision. If your practice does that, when you're checking distance vision, which is the most important part, you should move those to the outer position, which is where they are now. The knob that's on the lower part of the picture in the center is used to push the patient's head back from the phoropter. And that sets what's called the vergence distance. And with that, you can move the patient away from the phoropter. Practically, it's mostly used to keep the patient from getting too close to the phoropter, because if they do, especially if they're wearing a mask these days with COVID, then they'll fog up the lenses in front of them, and you're going to get bad results. You can see on the bottom right part of the picture, there is a knob. There's actually two knobs there. It has a bunch of letters in it. Right now, it has the O at the top with the little black line underneath it. That is used to set different modes for the phoropter. The most important ones that we're going to be using today are the O with a little line under it, which means that it's open and the patient can see out of that ocular, or OC, which is occlude. Occlude means that it's covering the patient can't see out of the ocular, that it's covered up. There are some other things on there that, like for instance, GL is green lens, WMH is white Maddox rod horizontal, and white Maddox rod vertical is WMV. P is pinhole, R is for retinoscopy. So those are things that we may cover later in an advanced refraction webinar, but not too useful to us today. There's also, you'll see that there's a ring around that, and a knurled ring around that whole disc. And that knurled ring is, you can turn that, and if you need to put someone's refraction in and need to make big jumps in the spherical part, for instance, maybe they're a -12 or something, you can turn that, and rather than having to spin the dial on the side endlessly, then you can go in 3 diopter jumps with that, which makes it a little quicker. Okay, so once you get the patient all set up in the refractor, their one eye is occluded. Normally we refract the right eye first, the patient's right eye. So you close off the left eye and you have them, and then you check vision. And part of this is just to make sure they can see the chart, but also to get some baseline of where the patient is. You want to make sure that the patient can read down the chart. So check their vision. Get them down as low as possible, push them, make sure that even when they say they can't see it, that they guess until they guess wrong. And then the reason we do this is because you want to know if you're making them any better. If you get them down to 20/20 and then you refract them and they're 20/30, then that's probably not a good thing. Either something's gone wrong, maybe they fogged up the refractor, or maybe you just haven't done things right, or maybe you just can't get them any better, and then you know that the original prescription is the right one. I'm going to stop here. We're going to take just a quick break of about 5 minutes or so before we get into the mechanics of refracting. And so we'll be back in really about just about 5 minutes. So if anyone has any questions from the group here, or if you have questions you want to add in, then it'll be just we'll be back in a few moments. All right, so we'll get now we're going to get into the mechanics of actually refracting a patient. So we've got the patient in the room, they're in the exam chair, we've gotten the refractor all set up, they can see through the ocular for their right eye. And well, or let's say the pictures are for the left eye, so we'll say it's for the left eye, the right eye is covered up. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to, you guys hear me? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to move the focal point in front of the retina. So presumably the focal point is somewhere in the vicinity of the retina because you already put in their prescription. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some plus power. We're going to, there's a knurled disc of lenses that we can rotate in front of their eye, and to bring the focal point forward in the eye, we're going to rotate the knurled knob downward, and that will add more plus power. And so that brings the focus forward in the retina, and that will relax their accommodation. So if they're accommodating, they're already moving the focal point forward by sort of straining their eye and changing the focal power of the lens in their eye. But by adding more plus power, you move that focus point even further forward. And then so for the patient to see better, they need to relax their accommodation. And they can only relax it so much. So at some point, you're just going to be making things more blurry. And that's really what you're looking for. If you add some plus power by moving that knob down, and they don't notice that it's more blurry, they're indecisive, they say, oh, I'm not sure if it's better or more blurry, then you're relaxing their accommodation. Once you hit the point where they can't relax their accommodation anymore, then it's going to start to get definitely blurry for them. And so when you do this, it's hard if you only move it down at one click intervals. All of the knobs on the phoropter change power at 1/4 diopter steps. And so you're going to want to give them enough change that they can see the difference. So for a normal patient, one who's not a low vision patient, then you're going to want to do 2 clicks at a time for this part. So you move it down 2 clicks, and you want to say, is this better or more blurry? And the terminology really matters. You don't want to say better 1, better 2. You want to say, is this better or more blurry? Because for when you're adding plus power, it should definitely be more blurry when you've relaxed their accommodation and now you've moved the focal point forward on the retina. So again, here what we're doing is we're moving that focal point forward, we're blurring them. And that's by adding more plus lens. So then once we've blurred them, then you want to move that focal point rearward to the retina. And you want to move it just enough that that the light is focused, but not too much so that they have to accommodate. So you want to find that resting focal point for them. So at this point, once you've moved the focus forward, you're going to move it just a little bit backwards. So once they've said, yes, that's definitely blurry, then move it back until you say, is this better or just smaller and darker? So if you've relaxed their accommodation properly, and now you move the focal point backwards, it will definitely seem better to them. If you move it back a little bit further, then the patient can accommodate and they won't really notice a difference. So you want to make sure that it's actually better and it's not just looks darker, because as you add more minus power and move the focal point rearward, once you make them accommodate, then they're still going to be clear. They'll still be able to see the chart, but now they're straining their eye to do it. So you don't want to go too far. And as this happens, you want them to actually improve their vision. So as you're doing this, if you're unsure, make them read the chart again. Um, and if, let's say, they start out at 20/40, as you add minus power with each click on the refractor, each click on the refractor roughly equals one line on the chart. So if you add 2 clicks on the refractor, they should improve about 2 lines on the chart. And if they don't, then there's a good chance they're accommodating. And once you've done this, now you now have what's called the spherical equivalent of the eye. So you can't get them any better with sphere. You found that circle of least confusion, you put it on the retina, and now you're about as good as you can get with spherical refraction. So again, we've moved the focal point forward, and now we move it back, but not too far. Okay, so now comes the tough part, and that is checking astigmatism. And this is definitely the hardest part to master with refractometry. Um, and so we're going to spend a fair amount of time on this. When you're refracting the patient for astigmatism, the best target to use are these circular dots. And the reason for that is because with astigmatism, the uh, if the eye has astigmatism, then images will look clearer in one direction than another. So if you have someone with astigmatism that is in, say, the 90-degree meridian, which is straight up and down, or the 180-degree meridian, which is horizontal level, um, lines will look different depending on what direction they are. They may be clear or they may be more blurry, and it's confusing for the patient. So if you show them letters, some letters may be clearer than others. But when you use the astigmatic target with these dots in a radial pattern, then it eliminates that confusion. No matter what direction their astigmatism is, it won't matter, and it makes it much easier for the patient. As a general principle, you always have to check axis before you check cylindrical power. So make sure that you check the axis first. Once you determine the axis, then you can get the cylindrical power, because if you don't do that, you won't get an accurate refraction. We'll go through this more, but when we're using the Jackson cross, you want to make sure that you follow the red dot for minus cylinder and white for plus cylinder. And this again is just it brings us back to the fact that some phoropters are in minus cylinder and some are in plus cylinder. It just depends on what your practice uses. But you should know how to use both, but you will get used to using one versus the other. If you're if you're a certified ophthalmic assistant or ophthalmic technician, for your testing, you'll need to know both. And it's good as a professional to know how to do both. But you will probably just be using one or the other in your own practice. When you're checking the axis, you have to use the Jackson Cross lens in axis mode. I'm going to go over the Jackson Cross lens, but there are different practices that do things different ways. Some practices don't really, I have heard, don't check astigmatism beyond what the autorefractor gives them. I think that you really do a service to your patients if you know how to use the Jackson Cross. It's incredibly accurate in terms of getting really good refractions and great glasses for your patients, make their vision as clear as possible. By using the Jackson Cross, it's a remarkable way of checking astigmatism. So this is the Jackson Cross, and the actual Jackson Cross lens is the sort of central area there. It's black on the picture just because the ocular behind it when I took this picture was closed, but it's a clear lens. It has plus cylinder in one direction. It's a quarter diopter plus cylinder on one side of the lens, and a minus quarter diopter cylindrical lens on the opposite side. And by doing that, it lets you determine both the axis of the astigmatism, meaning the direction, and also the power of the astigmatism correction for a patient. There are different powers of Jackson Cross cylinder lenses. Pretty much all the phoropters that I know have a 1/4 diopter Jackson Cross. But there are handheld ones you can get that are half diopter and even 1 diopter Jackson Crosses that you can use for low vision patients. And again, the benefit of having a higher diopter Jackson Cross is that the difference in the image the patient will see will be greater. And so for a patient with low vision, it's harder for them to see fine detail more. But for the most part, you're going to be using this quarter diopter Jackson Cross. So there are 2 modes. You can see there's some knobs on there, the little knurled knobs, and then they line up with the A on the Jackson Cross, and that is where you're checking axis. So if you imagine a line drawn between those 2 A's on the lens, then when that is lined up with the axis on the phoropter, then you're in axis mode and you're going to be checking the axis. When you rotate the lens clockwise, then the P will line up with the line between the 2 P's will line up with the axis that's on the knob on the degree gauge on the phoropter. And so by rotating the Jackson Cross lens clockwise or counterclockwise 45 degrees, there are little détentes that it'll click into. You can align that Jackson Cross lens with the axis on the machine, and you can check either axis or power. And we'll be doing that in just a sec here. So there it is. It's rotated into position. The ocular is closed right now, which is why it's black behind it again. But if you look down at the bottom of the picture, you can't see it completely, but there's a degree gauge, and right now the way it's lined up, you're checking the axis. So the user has rotated into the axis position right now. So here's a better look at it. You can see there's this knob on the bottom of the screen. There are little tick marks on the knob, and right now they're pointed to about 40 degrees. They're covered up by that red arrow, but that's the axis that you're set to. And so you can see that the Jackson Cross is now the P's are parallel to that axis. So now you're in the power measuring mode. So this is how people will normally leave the Jackson Cross. If you have people, assuming they know what they're doing in the practice, then when you finish, you'll leave the Jackson Cross in the P position, the power measuring position. So when you start measuring the astigmatism, you're going to, again, start with the axis. So you have to rotate that Jackson Cross counterclockwise 45 degrees until the line between the A's are lined up with the axis on the machine. So now, again, you're in the axis position here. The A's are lined up at about 40 degrees, and you're ready to go. So now you can flip this lens back and forth using those knobs, and those red and white dots will flip position. So in one case, when you flip it, the lens will have the orange dot on the sort of counterclockwise position of the A, and flip it again, it'll be on the clockwise position of the A. So here you can see that the line, the red arrow between the A's is lined up at the 40 degree meridian. And if I flip that again, then that orange dot will be on the other side. So now looking at that purple arrow, the orange dot is on the left. If I flip it again, it'll be on the right. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask the patient, we're going to flip this lens back and forth, and we're going to ask the patient, which is clearer, 1 or 2? And we show them, we flip once, we show them 1, we flip again, we show them 2. So, and you can go back a couple times if you need to. Which is better, 1 or 2? 1 or 2? And the patient will tell you they're either equal, or 1 is better, or 2 is better. And let's say that we flip to this position. This is maybe 2. And the patient says that this is the better, this is the clearer image that they get looking at the astigmatic target. So at this point, you would want to rotate the knob on the phoropter. You'd want to rotate it in the direction of the dot. So here, if you look down on the phoropter, it says 0.25 in that little window, and it's red. That means you have a minus cylinder phoropter. And here's where it gets a little confusing. In a minus cylinder phoropter, you're going to want to rotate towards the red, and you follow the red or chase the red dot. In a plus cylinder phoropter, you're going to go the opposite way. And you come out with the same result optically, but the numbers will seem different, but you actually get the same lens power. But because we use minus cylinder, plus cylinder, you have to use the proper, you have to use this sort of the method that corresponds with your phoropter. So here, because we're using minus cylinder, you can see that the little window has 0.25 in red. It's a minus cylinder phoropter. So we're going to go after the red dot. So we flip back and forth. Patient says this is the clearest image they get. So now we're going to rotate in the direction. We're going to rotate the knob in the direction of the red dot. And here is the red dot, so we're going to rotate counterclockwise. And the thing that you rotate, there are actually two knobs here. The knob that's sort of sticking out towards you more is for the power. So the cylinder power is that one, but you have to reach back more towards the machine. And that second knob that sort of surrounds the first knob, you're going to rotate that a little bit. And how much you rotate, it doesn't actually matter that much, but as just a general rule, you want to rotate it about 20 degrees if the cylinder power is not very high, meaning it's a quarter or a half in the machine. And if it's more cylinder power, if it's 3/4 or more, you only really need to rotate it 2 of those little tick marks. Those tick marks are 5 degrees each, so you'd rotate it about 10 degrees, because usually you'll be pretty well lined up and you'll save yourself a little bit of work if you just rotate it a little bit, because they're probably not going to be that much different. When the astigmatism is lower, it's harder for the patient to see, and it'll seem a little squishier, where the patient won't be quite as clear on where the astigmatism is, because there's not much astigmatism. So then you'd want to rotate it probably 4 of those tick marks or 20 degrees. And again, it doesn't matter too much. But basically, so the patient has said, this is better. This is the better lens. We know we have to rotate counterclockwise, and then we rotate counterclockwise. We flip it again, and the patient at some point might say, okay, now the other position's better. And so you're going to go sort of, you might go 20 degrees counterclockwise, 10 degrees clockwise, and then the patient says, oh, they're both the same. And then you found the axis of the astigmatism. So again, the best way to do this is to practice. It is confusing, I understand, and this is again the hardest part of refracting, is knowing how to use the Jackson cross. But once you get it, then you can determine that axis even within a few degrees. I think going more than 5 degrees is sort of a waste of time. But you really can get it down to a very few degrees if you wanted to. But if you get them to within 5 degrees, then I think you're fine. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to determine the cylindrical power. And this again, we're going to get the cylindrical power, we now just move to the power cross position, which is where the P's line up with the meridian we've set on the phoropter. And again, we're going to flip back and forth and we say, which is clearer, 1 or 2? Is 1 better or is 2 better? And you can go back and forth a couple times. The patient will determine, will tell you which is clearer. And then we're going to start adding or subtracting cylindrical power. And again, it will depend on what phoropter you're using, minus cylinder or plus cylinder. But you basically want to keep doing that until the Jackson cross, when the two options, either adding more plus or minus cylinder, when they're equal. And then once you're done, you're going to remove the Jackson cross from the ocular. So that's all a little confusing. Let me show you more practically. So here we have determined the axis of the astigmatism at about 40 degrees. We're now going to rotate the Jackson cross 45 degrees until we hear the click. The line between the two P's on the Jackson cross the line is now parallel with the axis set on the machine. So we click it into position. We flip back and forth on the machine, and the patient will tell us which is better. And now, okay, so now we, if we flip back and forth, and let's say the patient says this one is better. So now we're going to use the knob, the other knob on the astigmatism correction at the bottom where that red arrow is. You're going to use the knob that's sort of closer to you, that's in the center. We turn that knob, and if you turn it to the right, you're going to increase the power of the cylindrical lens. And you will normally go 2 clicks as before. So you add 2 clicks of minus cylinder power, and that will change the number where it says 0.25 into 0.75. And the reason that we're adding more minus power is because the patient said that this was the best option. Where you see lined up on that line between the two P's, if you were to draw a line between them, the dots that are there are the orange or red dots. And so the patient liked more minus cylinder power. So you're going to add more minus cylinder power. If it were the white dots, because you're using a minus cylinder phoropter, if the white dots lined up, then you would want to decrease the amount of minus cylinder power, and you'd turn that knob to the left. So again, a bit confusing, but basically you're determining if the patient wants more minus cylinder power or more plus cylinder power, and then you rotate that knob accordingly. If you're on a plus cylinder phoropter, then it's going to be the opposite. If they select the white dots, then you're going to add more cylinder power because it's the plus cylinder phoropter. And if they get the red dots, then you're going to subtract more plus cylinder power. So a little confusing, very confusing, I know. The best way to do it is to try it out and practice, and especially practicing with someone who is a good refractionist and can use the Jackson cross. So you add more plus, you might subtract some, or I'm sorry, you might add more plus or minus. You go up in 2 click increments, which is a half diopter at a time. And whenever you give more minus, you have to take away some minus. So whenever you add say 2 clicks more minus cylinder power, you have to give more plus, and you do that by adding more spherical power on the large knob on the side of the machine. So if you give 2 clicks of more minus power, you have to give 1 click of plus power of sphere. And again, that's because when you add more cylindrical power, you're also adding some spherical power that's equal to 1/2 of the cylindrical power. So we'll be practicing that in our practicum here. But again, if you don't do that, then you're going to change the patient's prescription for the worse. Okay, and then you do it again for the other eye. So if you start on the right eye, you're going to then go to the left eye. Make sure that you close off one eye and open up the other eye on the oculars, and you will go through it and do the whole thing all over again on the other side. You won't have to set up their phoropter again, but you should. You just need you'll basically do the same thing in terms of checking the optics. Once you've determined the distance optical power, and you've determined sphere, you determine the axis, you determine the power of the cylinder, you now basically know the prescription. Some practices will want you to check near vision. You can use Prince's rule for this. That's a little bit beyond this course. Someone had asked if we have an additional course beyond this. We are going to be doing that into more advanced refraction, which we'll talk about Prince's rule. We'll talk about checking the vertex distance on the machine. And other things like duochrome, whatnot. But you can also prescribe glasses without checking near vision. For older patients, you can just go by age. Because presbyopia is highly predictable, you can prescribe an ad, a reading ad by age. And again, the reading ad is for patients' bifocals, where you put a lens in the bottom of their glasses, basically a different lens, and you add some plus power, and that lets them see up close. And you can do it based on this scale. This is what I use. So starting about age 42, they would be about a plus 125 add. And as you get older and older, you get up to about a plus 250. You'd never really want to go beyond plus 250. Some people might do plus 275, but if you as you add more converging power, then the focal point comes in. So if you add too much power, then eventually the patient will have to hold things very close to their eye to read them, and it's not comfortable. So once you get to about plus 250, plus 275, you're about 14 inches, which is a normal reading distance, and that's where you stop. So everyone above age about 56, you'll be around plus 250. So then if your practice wants you to do this, as a technician, you would write out the prescription. And this, again, saves time for the physician. So you take a prescription, you would write down what you get in the phoropter. You read off the phoropter. The first number is the spherical power. So in that top line, minus 3.00, that's the sphere that you got. If you're using a plus cylinder phoropter, you'll then write plus and whatever the spherical or the cylindrical power is, and then you'll write the axis. And if you're using a minus cylinder phoropter with the red number in that little window, then you're going to write a minus. So instead of minus 3 plus 275, it would be minus 3 minus 275 if it were a minus cylinder refractor. And then you write the little x, with times 90 degrees. And by convention, you write out all three of those numbers. So you wouldn't write minus 3.00 plus 2.75 times 90. You write out all of those numbers. And the reason is so that we know that everything's been written down. So if it said times 10, then you wouldn't know, well, did they forget the last zero, and was it really at 100 instead of 10? The top line is the right eye. You can write right eye, left eye. Sometimes patients like to know which is which. But just by writing the right eye on the top and the left eye on the bottom, the optician will know what's going on. You then write out the add, whether you determine that from refraction or whether you just gave them an age-appropriate ad, you write that in. Make sure that the patient's name is on the prescription. Date of birth is somewhat optional. I don't think you really have to put that on there. It can help. You'll want to write the refraction date. That's very important because an optician isn't going to want to fill a prescription that's 4 years old. If a patient has one eye that sees worse than the other, it's important to write impact resistant. If a patient can't see out of one eye, you can give them a balanced lens, which just makes it about the same as the other side so that the glasses are not going to tip on their, so one lens won't be heavier than the other. You can write balance on there. And usually these prescriptions are good for a year. So, putting the date on is obviously important. You generally don't have to write expires on the prescription like we do on contact lenses, but you can if you want to. These days, because of FTC rules, if you refract someone, you have to get them to sign for their prescription, and that will be based on your local protocols. But you have to give the prescription to the patient, and you have to have them sign that they received it. Unfortunately, we're all headed that way. I think that is basically right now that we have to make that change over. There's a FTC rule. If you don't know about that, that's a compliance issue that you really need to get on because patients can make complaints about that if they don't get their prescription. And even if the patient doesn't want it, you have to give it to them. If they refuse it, you have to write refuse and initial it. The lastly, I will say, just be polite. Like I've seen patients get refracted and then get left in the exam room with that phoropter right in front of their face. Don't do that. Undo the knob on the arm that holds the phoropter in place. Bring the phoropter to that resting position. Tighten the knob with it in the high position there, so that it's out of the way. And be nice to the person next to you or who's using the room next after you. And that's really pretty much it. Again, we'll be doing some more of these in the future training. I hope that you'll get on Oculiance.com and join us in this ongoing project that we have. I started my practice about 7 years ago, and I really asked myself, why are we reinventing all these things, and why can't we just share resources and all be professionals and be able to focus more on our patients rather than reinventing the wheel? And that's why we started Oculiance.com. There's some really useful things on there. You can save yourself some money using like the video eye charts, and I hope that it helps. We're going to keep working on it. I hope you join up as a member and use it in your daily practice. We'd love to have your input as well. And for anyone who wants to do a webinar or be on a panel, we're hoping to make this something that helps everyone. Thanks for your attention. I'm going to go back to our LiveStorm webinar here and see if anyone has any questions. Okay, so a couple questions. Richard asked, does the phoropter need to be level or adjusted to the patient? It should match their head, basically. Most patients, you want to make sure their head's vertical and the phoropter is in the horizontal position where it should be. And if they have some torticollis or like some neck issue where their head is permanently tipped to one side, then yes, you can kind of tip the phoropter to match their head. Because remember, the lenses are going to be basically on their glasses, or the lenses are on their glasses, which are level with their ears. So if their head's tipped to the side, then yes, you can tip the phoropter. Yes, we're offering another class. We haven't scheduled that yet, but we have your email, I think, and we'll be sending cards out for that to advertise that later. The in-person training at our office is going till noon, but I work here, so I'll stay as long as it takes to make sure that everyone who's here leaves knowing how to refract, period. Like, I will stay as long as it takes. Looking forward to more classes. That's great. I hope it's not just the donuts that we provide. But yes, I look forward to it too. I love to teach. I love to see people learn and get better because it helps patients, and that's what we do here. All right, and thanks, guys. I appreciate your attention. We'll be posting this on Oculiance and also probably YouTube and things like that. So we hope that it helps, and we'll probably be having some more in-person basic refraction classes too. Take care, guys. I'll stop now, and we'll be real humans and start learning how to do this. Glad you like the donuts.